Welcome back to Nature Labs and our coverage of the 2025 Newfoundland and Labrador provincial election. We hope tonight's helped you go beyond the headlines to dig into those hard to understand or maybe even misunderstood terms that we hear on the news during an election like this one, and that we've provided a bit of context so you understand how this election relates to what you're learning in class and, of course, what this election might mean for you, whether you live in Newfoundland or Labrador or anywhere across the country. Now, this will be our final video for the night because we do have a final result, and that is that the Progressive Conservatives, led by Tony Wakeham, will be forming a majority government. So that long-winded video we just posted about different scenarios, if it's a majority or minority, that was all pointless. But at least you understand how it works now. Tonight, we do know that it will be a majority government, but of course the caveats that we mentioned earlier still do stand. Right now, at least, it's looking like a razor-thin majority government, 21 of the 40 seats in the House of Assembly. That's still subject to change a little bit, but it will stay on the majority side, at least, for the time being. There could be at least some chances of potential judicial recounts, and that could alter the result, but at least right now, the media outlets have determined that that won't alter the fact that it will be a majority, even if a very slim majority. That means Tony Wakeham gets to govern the province going forward. And of course, the question you probably have is, what does that mean for Newfoundland? What does that mean for Canada? Well, a couple of things. Think back to what we've discussed today. Of course, the big issue that framed this election was the Churchill Falls Agreement. Now, legally speaking, it's very unlikely that the Conservatives can rip up the agreement, even if they dislike it, even if they feel like they could have negotiated a better deal. But what they have promised to do is send it to a third-party review, potentially put it on pause, and see if there are additional concessions that can be made to strengthen the hand for Newfoundlanders. We'll see how that works. Of course, it takes two to tango, and that does mean Quebec has to play a role in this, and Hydro-Quebec more specifically. There is a legal binding agreement, even if there is still terms to be worked out in the coming months and years ahead. So that, of course, will be played out. That creates a sort of a curveball of uncertainty at a time where we're all dealing with massive uncertainty with the economy, with energy security, and of course, with interprovincial relations. So we'll watch that carefully to see how it all ends. Certainly, Newfoundlanders have felt like they've been taken advantage of for a very, very long time. The Progressive Conservatives campaigned on the belief that they could do more, that they could do better, and now they'll have the chance to show that they can do that if they can. That is a bit of a repudiation of former Premier Andrew Furey and, of course, John Hogan and their campaign, that this was a generational agreement, a chance to right historical wrongs and create that certainty. Clearly, the people of Newfoundland and Labrador did not agree. I think part and parcel of that, of course, was specifically rural Newfoundlanders felt like they weren't getting a voice, whether it's in that agreement or policies more broadly. The urban-rural divide, we talked about that earlier. Whether or not it's overplayed or whether we're talking in monolithic terms when there is no monolithic body of rural or urban, that's all fair. But very clearly tonight, the Conservatives have gained power with the support of rural constituencies. That divide is ever more present in a province where it wasn't as pronounced in past elections. That's something to watch going forward. Equally, it shows in the sort of the age-old debate that we've talked about in class about whether our electoral system favors rural communities or urban communities. Tonight shows that regardless of where you stand on that fact, that the basic fact that votes matter is something that we should all take home with us tonight. Because at the end of the day, rural constituencies felt they were not being heard, they've made their voice heard, they cast their ballot, and they have changed governments. Of course, that's the beauty of a democracy. We should never forget that or take that for granted, but it also demonstrates that in our electoral system, rural and urban at different times have been able to sway governments when they felt their voice was not being heard. That shows that our electoral system, as imperfect as it might be in your eyes, still does work and still can deliver results for different constituencies at different times. The third factor we're seeing in this, of course, the Conservatives campaigned on a belief that we should save the economy to save the environment and the natural resources that underpin the economy of Newfoundland and Labrador. That message clearly resonated, again, probably more consistently with rural voters than urban voters, but certainly with a plurality of Newfoundlanders and Labradorites. And I'm sure you're Labradorites, but you get what I'm trying to say. The bottom line here, though, is that the message that offshore oil and gas is a greener alternative to, say, coal being burned in places like India and China, that resonated. The idea that an energy transition should include oil for the foreseeable future, that we need to protect the economy to generate the economic resources to pay for the environmental transitions and needs to protect things like fisheries. That undercurrent message in a question that we've teased in class a lot which is the way we should go. Newfoundland and Labrador have decisively said, or maybe not decisively, but have said at least in the majority sense, that they want to back the economy to protect the environment. That's certainly a sentiment that we're seeing play out across the country, whether in elections, whether in polls, whether in just sort of the everyday conversation we're hearing from our politicians, that the prioritizing of the economy to help the environment or just to help the economy is the number one idea that is resonating with voters across the country. And speaking of polls, the polls in this election weren't totally accurate. They did say it was going to be a close race, but the way it was breaking down, the suggestion was it was going to be a Liberal majority, not a Conservative majority. Again, I would emphasize to you that you should not disregard all polls or think that all polling is garbage. It's a moment in time. That moment can change even in a 24-hour period as events and people reflect on the world around them. The second fact is, we discussed earlier, in a small province like Newfoundland and Labrador, the sample size will always be imperfect and the results will always be hard to understand in terms of what it might mean in seat breakout. Because again, it's not a popular vote contest, it's a seat contest. So the polls here, while a bit inaccurate, weren't wildly off. They were just off in terms of how we interpreted the polls would react when it got to the seat count. So that's something to keep in mind going forward. The bigger thing here going forward as well is that the Maritimes, and Newfoundland specifically, has been sort of a bastion of Liberal support for a very long time. We saw that begin to change in the last federal election, where the Conservatives picked up some seats, even if Mark Carney was able to hold on to power federally. But it also does show that the demographics are shifting. Alberta is not maybe as monolithically conservative as they once were. Quebec might not be as monolithically supportive of nationalistic parties, particularly the Bloc or the Parti Québécois provincially. And Newfoundland might not be a bloc of Liberal support going forward. There might be more opportunities to the federal Conservatives. The bigger message, if I were the federal Conservatives watching this race, is that once again, the polls, for all that we just said, did seem to underestimate the support of youth, and that youth were motivated to turn out and were motivated to turn out in favor of a Conservative Party. That bodes well for Pierre Poilievre federally. He certainly has a strong base of youthful support, a strong base of youthful support that might not be accurately being tabulated by the polls across our country. That's something to watch. The last election, federal election that is, was much closer than many people anticipated, largely again because the accounting for young people and young people's shift towards conservative politics. And that means that we shouldn't count out Pierre Poilievre federally. That Mark Carney might have a strong minority, he might be very popular federally. That doesn't mean that he could win another federal election, especially if that election's not fought necessarily on a trade war, but on cost of living and crime issues that are resonating, frankly, with your demographic. And if your demographic shows up, that could still shift the results. So that's one takeaway from the federal political scene from a provincial election in Newfoundland and Labrador. The other, of course, is that we still see divides, we still see disunity, we still see friction between regions. We're still very much not on the same page about the big questions of our day. That makes it challenging no matter who gets to govern any jurisdiction. It means it'll be a challenge for Premier Wakeham to make sure that he's governing for all Newfoundlanders and Labradors, people from Labrador, and that's going to be a challenge for Prime Minister Mark Carney to find ways to account for this increasing divide we're seeing between regions going forward as a country. So those are all big challenges for tomorrow, but for tonight, the Progressive Conservatives get to celebrate a victory. They've ended 10 years of Liberal rule in Newfoundland and Labrador. And it goes to show you again, 10 years is a long time for one party to hold power, even if they change leaders. And it also goes to show you that anything can happen when people decide to turn up and cast their ballot, which is the most important message of all that I hope you take home with you tonight, is that for all the challenges we face, the only way that we can solve them is together and through our democracy. Our democracy only remains healthy if we are good stewards of our democracy. Democracy is fragile, now more than probably ever before, or certainly in your lifetime. This is a pivotal moment, and we all need to nurture and steward our remarkable gift that is our democracy. Nights like tonight, whether you're happy or sad with the result, it doesn't matter. What does matter is that it was a fair, transparent election that delivered results that the public wanted to see happen. We changed governments. That's what democracy does. Tonight was a success for Newfoundland, a success for Canada, regardless of your partisan affiliation. And we must never forget that, even if our team wins or loses. So that's something to take with you. Of course, keep watching the results, see if there's going to be recounts. See what that might mean going forward. Watch to see who will be in cabinet. Of course, politics, whether you love it or hate it, at the end of the day, is determining who has power to make the decisions that impact our lives in so many ways. Someone's going to have power. We get to decide it, only if we choose to show up and be heard. And of course, tonight, Newfoundlanders were had the opportunity to do so, and so will you in a few short years. But don't forget, you can make your voice heard in so many different ways. But the best way you can do it is by being an informed, engaged citizen in our democracy and making sure that it stays that way.